Priscilla Presley never planned to tell anyone what Elvis whispered to her during their final dance in 1976. But decades later, she finally revealed the truth. And it wasn't romantic, or glamorous, or anything fans expected. It was a quiet sentence that shattered her, and still breaks hearts today. December 29, 1976. Graceland. Cold air wrapped around the mansion like a thick blanket, and the white lights along the driveway flickered softly in the wind. Inside, the warmth felt gentle and slow, the way old homes feel after years of familiar footsteps. A small holiday gathering was already underway. No crowds, no reporters. Just a handful of people from Elvis's inner circle, Jerry Schilling, Charlie Hodge, a couple of cousins, and a few quiet friends who'd known him long before the jumpsuits and the arenas. The record player crackled in the corner, spinning slow love songs that filled the room with a warm, golden haze. Priscilla arrived quietly, brushing snow from her long winter coat. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure what to expect. Elvis hadn't been at his best that year. Everyone knew he was tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually. But the moment he saw her, something in him changed. His whole face softened, and he straightened his posture as if her presence alone lifted some invisible weight off his shoulders. She offered a soft smile. He gave one back. The room hummed with low conversation, but the sound seemed to fade when Elvis stepped toward her. The opening notes of "She Wears My Ring" floated through the air, carried by the small speakers that had played hundreds of songs in that same room. Elvis held out his hand. No words, just a simple gesture. She took it before she could talk herself out of it. They moved slowly at first, small steps, soft sways, the kind of dance that didn't need rhythm or skill. It only needed history. The carpet brushed their shoes. The dim lights painted their shadows across the walls. For a moment, it felt like the early 60s again, when they'd dance in kitchens or hallways for no reason at all. Time folded in on itself. Elvis's hand rested gently against her back, warmer than she remembered. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to perform. He just held her the way two people do when they know each other in quiet, unspoken ways. Outside, the winter wind pushed against the window panes. Inside, the record skipped softly, then recovered. She could hear Elvis breathing, slow, steady, almost syncing with the music. Why do some moments stay frozen inside us? And if you knew a moment was your last, would you hold tighter or let go sooner? Priscilla felt the weight of years between them. Good years, hard years, complicated years. But none of them mattered right then. All she felt was the warmth of his hand, the softness of his steps, and the strange peace settling over the room. Then something changed. It was small at first, barely noticeable, but she felt it. His hand trembled. The rhythm of his breathing shifted. His chest rose unevenly. His steps slowed, almost stopping. The room kept moving around them. Jerry talking near the bar, Charlie laughing quietly. But Elvis and Priscilla stood still in the middle of it all. Halfway through the song, his voice changed. Elvis didn't lift his head right away. His chin hovered near Priscilla's shoulder, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if he was catching his breath or trying to steady himself. The record kept spinning behind them, the soft crackle filling the room like falling snow. Priscilla tightened her hand around his just slightly. "Elvis? You okay?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took one more slow step, then another, and then stopped completely. His hand on her back trembled again. Not a dramatic shake, just a soft, uneven quiver that sent a thin ripple of fear through her chest. Something was wrong. Elvis usually joked when he danced. He'd hum the wrong notes on purpose or whisper silly comments just to make her smile. But tonight, his silence felt heavy, fragile, like the quiet around him might crack if anyone spoke too loudly. He inhaled deeply. The breath stuttered halfway through. His forehead brushed hers, not romantically, but in a way that told her he wasn't fully present in the room anymore. He was carrying something inside, something he'd held back for too long. The lights above them dimmed slightly as someone adjusted a switch across the room. Charlie called out to Jerry about grabbing another drink. A camera flash from someone's old Polaroid flickered near the bar. Life continued like nothing strange was happening. But inside that tiny pocket of space between them, time paused. Elvis leaned in. Not dramatically, not slowly, just close enough for his breath to warm the side of her cheek. Then he whispered. The words were soft, barely louder than the scratch of the record. At first, Priscilla didn't understand them. They didn't match the moment. They didn't match the song. They didn't match anything he'd ever said to her during a dance. They weren't playful. They weren't romantic. They weren't even about her. They were raw, unexpected, completely out of place. Her entire body stiffened. She pulled back just enough to see his face. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, staring past her like he was seeing someone, or something, far beyond the room. Elvis, why would you say that? But he didn't respond. He didn't clarify. He didn't repeat himself. Instead, he blinked hard, wiped the corner of one eye with the back of his hand, and forced a tiny smile. One of those smiles he used on stage when he didn't want anyone to worry. The record skipped again. Once, twice. The scratchy sound jolted her. The soft shuffle of feet nearby told her people were about to walk past them. The moment was slipping away. She opened her mouth to ask him again, to make him explain the sentence that had just cracked something inside her. But before she could speak, he gently loosening his hand from hers. Elvis. But he cut her off with the softest whisper of all. Later. Only he never explained later. The conversation in the room grew louder as Jerry and Charlie stepped closer. The mood snapped back to normal. Elvis straightened his back, cleared his throat, and forced another smile. One that didn't reach his eyes. Priscilla stood frozen in place. Because what he whispered wasn't meant for a dance. Priscilla didn't move at first. Her body still felt the echo of his whisper. Those strange, misplaced words that didn't belong to the dance, the song, or even the moment. She kept replaying them in her mind, trying to make them fit into the Elvis she knew. But they didn't. Something about that sentence scared her. Not in a dramatic way, in a deeply human way. The room shifted back to normal around them. Jerry laughed at something Charlie said. Someone opened a bottle in the corner. The record player crackled as the next song started. People were talking and moving, unaware that something fragile had just cracked open between Elvis and Priscilla. Elvis stepped away from her. Just a small step, but enough to break the bubble they had been in. He brushed his hands against his pants, cleared his throat, and straightened the collar of his jacket. His eyes were still wet, but he blinked the emotion away so fast anyone else would have missed it. Anyone except her. Elvis, we need to talk about what you said, she whispered. He shook his head, quick, nervous, almost defensive. Not here, he muttered. Not tonight. Before she could ask again, Jerry and Charlie walked over to them. There you two are, Jerry said. Thought you disappeared. Elvis forced a small laugh. It sounded hollow. He wiped his face again, pretending it was just sweat from the warm room. Priscilla saw right through it. Jerry handed Elvis a glass of water. Elvis took it with hands that still trembled slightly. Charlie asked him if he wanted to run through a song later, but Elvis didn't answer. He just stared into the water like it held the rest of the sentence he couldn't bring himself to say. Priscilla stepped closer. Elvis. But he cut her off again with that same gentle later. Only this time the word felt final. The night moved on. People mingled, laughed, told old stories. Elvis stayed quiet. He sat on the arm of a chair, flipping through a stack of Polaroids someone had brought, though he wasn't really looking at them. He wasn't truly in the room anymore. Priscilla watched him, her stomach tight. Why would he say something like that? Why say it during a dance? Why say it to her? The whisper didn't fade with time. It grew sharper, heavier. A truth doesn't disappear just because you force it down. It sits in your chest. It waits. It becomes something you carry even when you don't want to. Later that night, when she finally walked out into the cold Memphis air, she felt an ache she couldn't explain. Elvis had hugged her goodbye, but the hug felt more like a plea than a farewell. His whisper replayed over and over in her mind like a broken record. What do you do when someone gives you a truth they're too afraid to explain? And how long can a sentence sit inside you before it becomes a burden? Priscilla didn't tell anyone. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for decades. She kept the whisper locked in her memory, buried under interviews, books, and years of protecting his legacy. But the secret didn't stay quiet inside her. It grew heavier every year. For almost 3 decades, Priscilla carried the whisper alone. She built a life, raised her daughter, protected Elvis's legacy with everything she had. But the sentence he whispered during their last dance stayed quietly inside her, tucked away like a sharp piece of glass she never dared to touch. Every now and then, during interviews or anniversaries, someone would ask, "What was Elvis really like?" Priscilla would smile, give a gentle memory, and move on. She never mentioned the whisper. She never hinted at the truth. She guarded it the same way Elvis used to guard his deepest fears, silently. But secrets don't disappear. They wait. And in 2004, one of them found her. She was going through old boxes in a storage room, dusty containers filled with photos, scarves, ticket stubs from the Las Vegas Hilton shows, and handwritten notes from years spent living in the orbit of a legend. Half the boxes hadn't been opened since the early 80s. A cold draft slipped under the door as she pulled out a small cardboard container labeled simply, 1976. December. Her heart tightened. Inside were Polaroids from holiday gatherings, a worn record sleeve, a ticket from a fan club dinner, and at the bottom, a thin, brown notebook she didn't recognize at first. The cover was soft with age, and a small crease ran down the spine like someone had opened it only once, then closed it again forever. She opened it. On the first page was her handwriting. One sentence at the top, December 29th, after the dance. Her breath caught. She remembered writing that. She just didn't remember what came after. The room around her seemed to fade as she turned the page. The entry wasn't long, paragraph at most, but every word hit her like a wave crashing after years of silence. She had written about Elvis's trembling hands, the look in his eyes, the way he whispered the sentence so softly she barely heard it. She wrote that she didn't know what to do with it, that it scared her, that it felt like a truth he needed someone to hold. Reading it felt like being pulled back to that night. The soft glow of Graceland's lamps, the warmth of his hand on her back, the sudden drop in his breathing. She could almost hear the record spinning again, almost feel the carpet under her shoes as they danced. Her chest ached. Why do we hold on to some memories like anchors? What finally makes us open the boxes we vowed to never touch? Priscilla sat on the floor, the diary trembling in her hands. She realized that by burying the whisper, she had frozen that moment in place. She never let herself face it. She never let herself grieve what it meant. A knock at the door pulled her out of the haze. Marla Jennings, the archivist who'd been helping her organize, peeked in. "You okay?" Marla asked. Priscilla didn't answer right away. She held up the notebook. "I wrote something a long time ago." Marla stepped inside, noticing the emotion on Priscilla's face. "Do you want to talk about it?" For almost 30 years, the answer would have been no. But something about the diary page, her own handwriting speaking back to her, made silence feel impossible. "Sit with me," she whispered. Marla did. Priscilla opened the notebook again, hands shaking the same way Elvis's had during their final dance. She stared at the words she had once been brave enough to write, but never brave enough to speak. Then she did something she hadn't done since 1976. She read the entry, slowly, out loud. Her voice broke halfway through. The truth, once whispered to her in a dimly lit room at Graceland, finally crossed another pair of ears. And as soon as she finished, she closed the book with trembling fingers. Because now that she had spoken it, she knew she'd have to speak it again. For years after reading that diary entry out loud, Priscilla kept the truth close. Closer than jewelry, closer than photographs, closer than any memory she allowed herself to revisit. She carried it through interviews, anniversaries, museum meetings, and long quiet nights when Graceland felt too full of echoes. But eventually, the weight of silence became heavier than the whisper itself. It happened during a private conversation tied to an anniversary project, One meant to honor the quieter, human side of Elvis. Only a small group was present: a historian, project director, and Marla Jennings, the archivist who had been with her since the diary moment. They sat in a small room filled with old photos and reels of footage from the late 70s. A lamp buzzed softly in the corner. The hum reminded Priscilla of the way Elvis used to warm up before shows. Soft, gentle, almost like he was whispering to the air before whispering to the world. Someone asked a simple question: "What moment from Elvis's final year still stays with you?" Priscilla's hands tensed. Her heart thudded. She knew the answer, but she had avoided it for decades. She could have mentioned a concert, a joke he told, a quiet dinner at Graceland. Instead, the words came out before she could stop them. "Our last dance," she said softly. The room went still. Even the lamp's hum seemed to fade. She took a slow breath, bracing herself against the memory. She described the dim lights at Graceland, the soft crackle of the record player, the warmth of his hand on her back. She told them how his breathing shifted, how his steps slowed, how his eyes looked like they were holding back a storm no one else could see. But she didn't stop there. Her voice lowered. Her shoulders tightened. She told them about the whisper. "It wasn't romantic," she said. "It wasn't a confession of love or regret. It wasn't anything people imagine when they think about Elvis and me." Marla leaned forward a little, a softness in her eyes. "Then what was it?" she asked gently. Priscilla hesitated. Her throat tightened. She had heard fans say Elvis was larger than life, that he never feared anything, that he lived boldly until the very end. But she knew a different side of him, the side that struggled under the weight of being Elvis Presley, the side that carried burdens no one else could understand, the side that whispered truths only in the safest moments. She closed her eyes for a second, as if listening to the past replay itself. Then she spoke the sentence, the one Elvis whispered into her ear during their final dance. The room didn't gasp. No one moved. There was no dramatic reaction. Just a long, heavy silence, the kind that grows when people hear something too real to respond to quickly. It wasn't a romantic whisper, not even close. It was a confession, a fear, a quiet, breaking truth from a man who carried the world on his shoulders. She saw it on their faces: shock, sadness, a kind of sudden understanding that hit deeper than any story they'd read in books. And for the first time in nearly 30 years, Priscilla felt something shift inside her. Her chest loosened, the ache softened. Speaking the whisper didn't betray Elvis. It honored him, because the truth he trusted her with wasn't meant to shine. It was meant to be understood. The project director wiped the corner of his eye. Marla exhaled shakily. The historian closed his notebook, realizing this wasn't something he could write down casually. Priscilla looked at each of them, reading the weight in their expressions. She knew the whisper had changed them the same way it had changed her. And the words didn't just land in the room, they shattered it. After that private meeting, Priscilla went home with a strange stillness inside her. For years, the whisper had lived like a shadow behind her ribs. Quiet, heavy, unspoken. But now that she had finally said it out loud, she felt something she hadn't felt since 1976. Relief and pain, both at once. She walked the halls of Graceland the next morning before the public tours began. The sun hadn't risen fully yet. A thin, pale light spilled across the floorboards near the staircase. The record player in the corner sat silent. The piano was dark, but somehow the mansion felt different, felt lighter, like a long-held breath had finally been released. For the first time, she understood why Elvis had looked the way he did during their last dance. Tired, overwhelmed, hopeful, scared. That whisper wasn't meant to shock her. It wasn't meant to confuse her. It wasn't even meant to hurt. It was meant to be handed to someone he trusted. She remembered the trembling of his hand, the uneven breath, the way he said later when he knew he wouldn't explain. He hadn't told her because she was his wife or his ex-wife. He told her because she was the one person who knew the man behind the spotlight. The whisper reshaped everything. She looked back on their marriage differently. The arguments, the small joys, the late-night talks he never had with anyone else. She saw the pressure he carried during those Las Vegas Hilton shows in '76, the strain behind his eyes when he waved to crowds of more than 15,000 people. She saw a man trying to hold up a world that kept getting heavier. And she understood why he chose that moment. During a quiet dance, far from the cameras, far from the stage, to reveal the truth. What do we owe someone's final words? And what responsibility comes with knowing something no one else ever heard? Priscilla spent the next years shaping how Elvis's legacy was told. Not as a perfect myth, but as a human being with fears, hopes, and breaking points. She spoke more softly in interviews. She corrected stories that painted him as untouchable. She added small details in documentaries that reminded people he was flesh and blood, not a symbol carved into stone. Fans noticed it. A woman from the fan club once wrote her a letter saying, "You talk about him like he's still in the room." And in a way he was. The whisper stayed with her, guiding the way she protected his memory. During the 25th anniversary tours, Priscilla paused longer at the spot where they once danced. She didn't tell anyone why. She simply stood there, letting that old familiar ache swell and fade like a tide. Sometimes she placed her hand on the back of a chair he used to sit in, as if grounding herself to the truth he left behind. The whisper didn't rewrite their history. It revealed the heart of it, the part no one else saw. Still, even after sharing it once, a question lingered in her mind. Why did he choose that moment to say it? For years after sharing the whisper privately, Priscilla carried the memory with a different kind of weight. Not heavy like before, but meaningful, almost sacred. She finally understood that Elvis hadn't chosen the moment by accident. He whispered those words during a dance because that was the one place he didn't have to be Elvis Presley. He could just be a man, tired man, a scared man, a hopeful man trying to tell the truth before it slipped away. When Priscilla walked through Graceland now, she saw echoes of him everywhere. Not the superstar, the man who hummed while looking for his keys, the man who scribbled notes on napkins during midnight snacks, the man who leaned on her when the world felt too loud. Every time she heard, "She wears my ring," she felt the same tightening in her chest. Not from heartbreak, though the ache was always there, but from the moment of understanding that came decades later. The whisper wasn't meant to be romantic. It wasn't meant to be grand. It wasn't meant to be remembered by millions. It was meant for one person, and it was meant to be kept safe. What would you do if someone trusted you with the last truth they ever shared? And if that truth was small, fragile, and human, would it break you or make you stronger? Priscilla realized something important. The world loved Elvis the icon, but Elvis didn't whisper to an icon. He whispered to the woman who knew him long before the lights, long before the pressure, long before the fear of losing control over his own life. He whispered to the only person who could carry it without twisting it into legend. Sometimes, during late-night museum tours or quiet interviews, she'd pause suddenly mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-thought. She'd hear a soft echo in her memory. Not the words themselves, not even his voice, just the feeling of him leaning close, trusting her with something he never said to anyone else. And she understood the real heartbreak. It didn't come from the sentence he whispered. It came from knowing why he whispered it. It came from seeing how human he truly was in that moment. How vulnerable, how honest, how much he needed someone to hold the truth for him when he couldn't hold it himself anymore. Priscilla never shared the whisper publicly. Not fully, not word for word, because it wasn't meant for the world. It was meant for her. But she did say one thing whenever people asked about their final dance. Some truths belong to the moment they were spoken, and some moments never leave you. To this day, Priscilla says that whenever she hears footsteps on the old wooden floors, or when a slow song drifts through a quiet room, she feels that night return to her. Not as sadness, but as a reminder that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, a single sentence, passed from one heart to another, and that's why The Last Dance still breaks hearts. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still carries a quiet truth from their past. Some memories fade, but some stay with us because they still have something to teach. Tell us in the comments, what moment from someone you loved still echoes in your heart?